Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Cohn. I'm Executive Director of Public Affairs at the Union League Club of Chicago, and the club is very proud to co-sponsor with the Leagues of Women Voters chapters from throughout the north suburbs today's candidate debates, the candidate forum that you've so graciously attended today. As I said, my major credential here is not the Union League Club of Chicago, but a proud graduate of Deerfield High School. And wandering around this place, it is, thank you. I am deeply grateful for the education I received here, and I now realize how old I really am. If you walk around at the trophy cases and you look and see that the oldest athletic trophy is about 10 or 15 years after you graduated, you're old. But good afternoon and welcome. The Union League Club of Chicago is involved in activities like this. I'd like to explain briefly why. The Union League Club is the only private club in the United States with an institutional commitment to public affairs and community service. The reason for that dates to our founding in 1879. The club is a descendant of a movement that arose during the Civil War that called itself the Union Leagues of America. It was a volunteer citizen organization dedicated to helping President Lincoln defend the Union. That's where the Union League Club name comes from. And so for the last 139 years, we've been involved in an active program of civic engagement. We regularly hold programs at the club, many times in cooperation with the League of Women Voters at the state level, at the Chicago level, and at the regional level, to provide educational programs to keep us all informed about what's going on in civic affairs. And certainly one of those important aspects of civic involvement is being vigilant of those elected to serve us at the local, state, and federal level, and also finding out about the qualifications and the intent of those who seek our votes in these elections. And it is in that context that we are so proud to welcome everyone here to Deerfield High School for these candidate discussions today. So we thank you for taking the time and for engaging in this most important aspect of a democracy. Citizens gathered to hear from those who seek to represent us in public office. Now to keep our program underway and to keep us on time, it's my privilege to introduce the co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Deerfield area, Rosemary Heilman. Rosemary?
You are all participating in democracy, so thank you. All right, we have a wonderful moderator today. Her name is Lolly Watt, and she is a member of the League of Women Voters of Wilmette. So she lives outside the districts of the candidates who are being showcased today. Lolly is a 15-year member of her league, and she got into it kind of in the reverse. She was a village trustee in Wilmette first, and then became a league member. Often it goes the other way around. Since that time, she has been president of the league and is currently the advocacy chairman, which, aside from all these voter service activities that we participate in, the league also has a side of it where we address issues and educate the public about issues. Lolly is also on the League of Women Voters of Illinois State Board as the governance vice president. So we're very lucky to have her here today. I have one other thing to tell you about, and that is a brand new Illinois voter guide. The League of Women Voters of Illinois has contracted with a company that is providing information on the candidates on your ballot using all the information on each candidate's Facebook pages, websites, other public pronouncements. And what's great about this guide, you go to Illinois Voter Guide and you put in your address, and it brings up only the candidates that will be on your ballot. And then it shows information, and you can click on the information, and it has some summaries about their positions on different issues. Then you click again, and it'll bring you to their websites or their Facebook pages. So it's a wonderful tool to focus your research on the candidates that you are going to be voting on. And then there's another opportunity to create your own ballot also. So we have cards and information out in the hallway, so make sure you stop by before you leave today and take advantage of this wonderful new tool offered by the League of Women Voters of Illinois. So thank you very much. Lolly will explain the rules. You're going to talk about the cards and the pencils and all that. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Candidates, please come up and take your seats. Before we started today, we had a coin toss to decide the order in which people will be going. And we will first have opening statements, which are a minute and a half. in the order that the candidates are seated. We're then going to have questions, and we are going to finish with closing statements in the reverse order to where they started. This is if I can keep track of everything correctly. All questions need to be written down, and I already see we have veterans in the audience because they have their hands up. They're getting cards on which to write the questions. The questions will be collected by the question collectors. They will be taken to the back. Please be aware that we do sometimes rewrite your questions, because if we get 2 or 3 very similar ones, we may combine them or do something to make them a little bit clearer. So don't be upset if we do a little bit of tweaking. We try to keep the sense of your question. And we would really like to thank the Union League Club and all the local leagues of women voters. This is really hard work for those of you who have not been involved in putting one of these together. And I would most like to thank my timers. There are people in the front who are timers. Candidates, they will be giving you a 30-second, and then they will give you a stop. So I do ask you to stop when they put the sign up to stop. And if you don't have a minute and a half worth of things to say, it is perfectly okay to stop ahead of time. That is, in fact, encouraged because we can get through some extra questions that way. I believe those are all the main rules. All the candidates, by the way, have agreed to these rules ahead of time. And with that, we will get started. The first opening statement will be by Mr. Lesser, by Cuentas. You ready?
Good. All right, all set, Lolly? Good. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Rick Lesser. I'll give you a little bit of background. I grew up in Highland Park, Illinois, graduated from the sister high school to this one, Highland Park High School. I lived in Deerfield with my wife, Terry, for 10 years. We had 4 children while we were here. We then moved to Lake Bluff, Illinois, where we live now. And I'm a lawyer. I practice law, particularly writing wills and trusts and similar estate planning documents. I have a 12-person law firm in Lake Forest, Illinois. So I know this district very well. Most importantly, however, I am also now a grandpa. I have a grandson who lives in the district right down the street, and I am very concerned about the future that he's going to face as I see people leaving this state in record numbers. We lost 30,000 people last year out of this state. It's like the city of Highland Park just picked up and left. Well, there goes that. There we go. I am very concerned about that. I think that this is simply the result of bad policy in Springfield. It's the result of taxes which are too high. It's a result of spending which is out of control. It's a result of making promises for government employees without saving the money in order to meet that. And the result has been a very bad economy for Illinois, as we see Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, neighboring states with just as bad weather prospering. We see Illinois with property values shrinking, and that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Morgan.
Good afternoon.
Check his microphone because it was working. There you go. Perfect.
Can everyone hear me? Bob Morgan, running. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Morgan. I'm running for state representative here in the district, here in Deerfield, where I live with my wife and 2 children. I'm so happy to see everyone. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting us today. I decided to run for office after seeing the ways in which state and federal government were failing to represent me and my community's values. I was devastated to see the Trump travel ban go into effect last January, where I was one of the lawyers who raced to O'Hare because that story impacted my family as my grandparents escaped Nazi Germany in the 1930s, and under the Trump travel ban would have been prohibited from coming to this country. I decided that Illinois was not representing my values because they were holding school funding formulas, school funding hostage in Illinois. And that was a political game that was impacting me and my family and my community. And I saw the ways in which we needed to do better. So when I decided to run, I looked to the experience I had in implementing the Affordable Care Act in Illinois. So I will be focusing on expanding health insurance coverage to those hundreds of thousands in Illinois who still don't have it, reducing healthcare premiums to the middle class who are being crushed by insurance companies. And when the time comes to pass a budget, I'll be making sure that we're spending no more than what we have coming in, but still protecting our priorities like school funding and human services. And lastly, this is an election about values. Fighting for a gun safety legislation in Springfield, making sure we're protecting a woman's right to choose, making sure we're protecting the environment. Thank you.
Candidates, please keep your microphones on. I'm told that's why we're having problems. Don't turn them off.
I'm going to leave that one off.
Mrs. Morrison, your opening statement, please.
Thank you and welcome to Deerfield High School. My name is Julie Morrison. I am proud to be the state senator for the 29th district, and I'm serving my second term. I'm a 37-year resident of this district, and I believe that the goals for state government right now should be restoring the financial stability of the state, but at the same time providing the necessary services, operations, and programs for the state of Illinois. I have developed a reputation of being an effective, accessible, bipartisan legislator. I am currently serving as the chairman of the Human Services Committee for the Senate, the chairman of the Children's Health Caucus, the chairman and founder of the Disability and Special Needs Caucus. I serve on the Environment Committee, the Transportation Committee, the Government Reform Committee, Gaming Committee, Environment, Appropriations, and Medicaid Oversight Committee, because those are all issues important to my district. I'm very proud to be endorsed by the Illinois Education Association, Planned Parenthood, Personal PAC, the Illinois Environmental Council, Sierra Club, the Firefighters of Illinois, and many other organizations who have seen the work that I do in Springfield. But I'm running on my record, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to tell you more about that.
Thank you. Mr. Davey, please, your opening statement.
Thank you. I've never run for office. My wife Sam and I are entrepreneurs who build successful companies. I've had the opportunity to be part of a team to build an impactful organization here in this community called Bernie's Book Bank. You spend a lot of time talking to people when you're running for office, and I was in Buffalo Grove recently talking to 3 couples with toddlers, and one of the women said to me, "We're leaving the state of Illinois because our property taxes are too high, and my husband can do his job from anywhere else." Turned out he was a young airline pilot. That's not a unique conversation for me, but what was impactful about it were the looks on the faces of the other couples. Clearly, they had not been informed of this decision. Clearly, they thought that they were going to raise their kids together, plant roots, build community, and unfortunately, the financial challenges of the state of Illinois will tear the roots from that community. This election's not about being a Republican, a Democrat, a liberal, a conservative. It's about capability. It's about human beings who want to live in this place. It's a wonderful place, and who want to stay here and plant roots. Illinois has the resources to be the best state in the country. Unfortunately, Springfield has mismanaged them. I love this state. I was born on the south side of Chicago. My dad, a Chicago policeman. My mom, a Polish immigrant who came through Ellis Island. I became an attorney. I built a national company in the media world, helped other companies get off the ground. We love this place. My experience will allow me to paint a bold vision, to bring people together and be inclusive, to be accountable to you, to the voters, and I am an action-oriented person. Everyone who knows me knows that. Thank you to the League.
Thank you. We are going to start with the first question. Keep your questions coming. Question 1, and we are going to start with Mr. Lesser, a minute and a half. We're going to move on from there. Do you support a progressive income tax for the state of Illinois? If not, how do you solve the state's fiscal problems? Mr. Lesser.
Good. Thank you. I would only support, I'm opposed to a graduated income tax. I think the only way that would be a beneficial thing would be if we had lower rates rather than higher rates. And I think that the plan to enact a graduated income tax is to raise rates. I do not believe that would be in the best interests of the people of the 58th District. I cannot imagine how Highland Park, Deerfield, Lake Forest, or Lake Bluff would benefit from paying higher taxes. So I am very much opposed to that. As to how we're going to balance the budget, that's always a very good question. And obviously, we need to cut spending. The state of Illinois needs to become more efficient. The state of Illinois needs to lower its number of employees. Private industry went through a period in the Great Recession and before where productivity rose tremendously. The state of Illinois has had no such renaissance. And it is time for the state to start balancing the budget rather than we have been carrying pension expenses off budget. We have been using borrowing money in order to pay for current expenses. This has been going on for a long time. We have the worst credit rating in the country, and interest rates are rising. This has been a terrible policy for the state of Illinois, and I will stop it. I'd like to sign.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, do you support a progressive income tax? And if not, how do you solve the state's fiscal problems?
I think right now we have an income tax that is literally not fair. We have an income tax that's built into our Constitution that says, regardless of your income, if you make $18 million this year or you make $18,000 this year, you pay the same amount of taxes. To me, that's fundamentally unfair, which is one of the reasons we don't have the resources that we need in the state of Illinois. It's a regressive tax. It's too heavy of a burden on the middle class. So I am supportive of the idea of a progressive income tax under one condition, and I'll only be supportive of it, in the event that it reduces our property taxes. Property taxes in our district, we have some of the best schools in the district, in the country, in the state, but our property taxes are getting so high that it's starting to tax people out of their homes. Both young families like my wife and I who moved here for the schools for our children, and also empty nesters who are looking to go elsewhere. So we need to adjust that and reduce our property taxes. So that's the only condition under which I'd support that. And I do think we need to really holistically look at changing the way we tax the state, because I think it's regressive. I think the idea of a gas tax is the wrong idea. Again, it's regressive. We need to make sure it's fair so that people are paying their fair share and we have the resources we need to protect the schools and pay for human services, which makes this community and the state so great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Morrison, do you support a progressive income tax? And if not, how do you solve the state's fiscal problems? Thank you.
A graduated income tax is a major change for the state and should and will require a constitutional amendment. So, one of the questions that people ask me are, what are the brackets? What is that going to look like? How will that affect my household? What are the numbers? So I believe that if we're going to consider a graduated income tax, that first the General Assembly should pass legislation which would set forth brackets in advance so that when you go to the ballot box and decide whether or not you want to support that initiative or not, you know exactly what that's going to mean for your household and for your income. I believe this is a very intelligent, well-read, engaged district that we represent, and I think that you will do what is right and correct for the state and for yourselves. But we should also be looking at a couple other revenue sources besides this. We get very little federal dollars flowing back from Washington. We need to be much more aggressive in how we are capturing federal dollars, and we should look at other opportunities like expanding gaming, bringing that tourism dollar into our state as opposed to our folks going across the border.
Thank you. Mr. Davey, do you support a progressive income tax for the state? And if not, how do you solve the fiscal problems?
So I start with agreeing with my opponent that this is, and I would argue, is the most educated Senate district in the state of Illinois, which means the people in this district drive the economy, they build companies, they employ people, they invest civically, they drive and carry a lot of weight. The challenge in Illinois right now is that we currently, when you take in Deerfield and Highland Park and these communities, when you take your sales tax, your income tax, and your property tax and you put them together, we're the highest taxed people in the United States. Simultaneously, we have the worst debt and the worst unfunded liability of any state in the United States. Now, this didn't happen overnight. This has been happening for decades to get to the place where we are. But currently, that's where we are. And not only do we have the worst taxes and the worst liabilities, we have the worst credit rating in the country, which means our debt costs a lot. And we have the worst funding of our local schools from a state governing body of any state in the United States. The average in the U.S., the average school district in the U.S. receives 44% of their funding from their state governing body. In Illinois, it's 28%, and in these districts, we're way lower. So I do not support a progressive income tax. I don't support taxes and giving more money and taking more money out of everyone here's pockets and handing it to folks who clearly have not been able to solve the fiscal challenges we have in this state.
For question 2, we're going to start with Mr. Morgan, and I'm going to try not repeating the question for everyone. If you need it repeated, just let me know, and I'd be happy to do so. So, question 2, starting with Mr. Morgan. Would you promote and support a constitutional amendment to fix the Illinois pension and retirement fund problems?
Thank you. I do not support a constitutional convention or constitutional amendment to change the pension clause in the Illinois Constitution. For starters, I believe that we need to keep the promise that we've made to existing retirees. People twice a month for their entire careers have consistently and without fail paid into the pension system. They kept their end of the promise. We have to keep ours to them, many of whom are living on fixed incomes. And I think that our values require that we are consistent and affirm that. That being said, while we have to keep our promise, we have to be realistic about the pension problem, the pension debt. In the last 4 years, our pension liability, our unfunded liability, has ballooned over $20 billion. It's almost $130 billion unpaid liability for pensions. So we have to be realistic while living within the Constitution, which is one of the reasons I support a model that has just begun in a pilot program. It's a consideration model, which is the concept of an early buyout for those whose increase of their cost of living is exponentially increasing over the life of their retirement. I don't know if that's sustainable. I don't think it's sustainable. I think we have to create options that reduces that liability immediately and reduces the amount of money that we're paying every year into our pensions, which is crushing our state budget. It's keeping us from investing in education. It's keeping us from reducing other taxes. So that's decades of mismanagement and kicking the can down the road by prior administrations. And I think that we have to be honest with what issues we are facing, and then we have to come up with reasonable solutions for them.
Thank you. Mrs. Morrison, constitutional amendment for the pension and retirement funded problem.
I don't think everything could be answered with a constitutional amendment, and I agree with much of what Mr. Morgan said. However, it is the big weight hanging around all of our neck in the state of Illinois. The consideration model is something that was put forward in 2012. It was not able to be passed through the General Assembly, and yet it has so much merit because it gives each individual person who is in the pension plan the opportunity to make a decision for him or herself. Do I want to keep my 3% compounded COLA, which is what is breaking our systems, or am I willing to exchange that for a simple interest in consideration of having my increased salary bumps go into my final pension calculation? We have looked at other ways to also start the buyout is one way. We've gone from a tier 1 to a tier 2 and now a tier 3, where 401k is an option, and I think that we need to carefully examine what kind of success we can get with that, but I'm not in favor of a constitutional amendment for this.
Thank you. Mr. Davey?
I'm good. My dad was a Chicago policeman for 35 years. He died at 61. That was 14 years ago. My mom lives on a widow's pension from the Chicago Police Department, and the Civic Federation of Chicago says we are 4.5 years away from them not making payments to retirees and widows and widowers. Mr. Morgan said we were $130 billion in debt to the big five pensions. He's right. We're about $260 billion in debt in aggregate or an unfunded liability when you take our police and fire local municipal pensions. By the way, we have 653 police and fire municipal pensions in the state of Illinois. There are 1,450 in the United States. We have 653 in Illinois. There are 1,450 in the United States. There's a lot of mismanagement going on here. The real work is on the ground. The real work is actually meeting with the stakeholders and bringing those people together and painting a vision. I agree with the other candidates so far up here that we have a debt to pay. There are 987,000 people in this state who are either in the pension or are retired, and they deserve their benefits. My mom's one of those people. They depend on those benefits. But those people are also the people that have to help us to convince the unions and Mike Madigan and the powers that be that we need a new approach going forward. And I've spent an hour or more a day since January. This doesn't get you elected, but it teaches you a lot with folks that are in those unions, that run those pension boards, and they all want a solution. And they believe that going forward, changing the rules for everybody we hire tomorrow going forward is the first step.
Mr. Lutz.
What they're talking about, by the way, in case somebody doesn't know, is Article 13, Section 5 of the Illinois Constitution, which provides that a public employee's benefits may not be reduced while they are in service. The problem with that is that sometimes these people are in service for 25, 30 years, and some promises have been made which should not have been made, and money was not saved in order to pay for these. I am in favor of repealing that section. I think that anybody who is currently retired should continue to get their retirement as they are now. I don't want it. It is wrong to change the rules after somebody has put in that kind of time. I think that is equally true of anybody who has, and to pick an arbitrary number, 20 years of service should not be changed. But on the other hand, someone who has only been working in public service for 5 years, I don't know that that really is wrong if they have to get a 401k style plan. I have a 401k style plan. I think most of us here in the audience probably do as well. The first thing we should be doing, you find yourself in a $250 billion hole. The first thing you do is stop digging. The first person who's hired tomorrow, because you don't have to amend the Constitution for this, first person who's hired tomorrow should be on a 401k style plan. This is the only way, by stopping the problem from getting worse, is the only way to start making it better. And this is why I'm running for this office. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 3, starting with Mrs. Morrison. This is on campaign finance. Would you support legislation to adopt a small donor matching campaign finance system for state representatives and senators? Small donor matching.
I would very much support that, and campaign finance reform is desperately needed in the state. My own election, I think this race is a very good example of an opponent who contributed $100,000 to his own campaign, breaking the caps and allowing untold numbers of any dollars to flow from any source. Most of the campaign contributions that I've received, I'm very grateful for the 25s and the 50s and the 100s and the people, every individual person who can contribute. I am disappointed that our race has come to this and that those kinds of values and principles have been violated.
Mr. Daly, small donor matching.
Sure. You know what? We started this campaign last fall, and we quickly learned how broken this system is. What we saw was that the system on both sides of the aisle, so nobody's got clean hands here, would poll a district, choose a candidate based on identity politics, give them the money they needed to run, tell them what to say, get them elected, and then they would tell them what to do in Springfield. We started working really hard and raising our own money, and I'm really proud of the fact that I've got over 400 human beings that have supported my campaign. Through the first half of the year, I had over 300 individual donors, over $150. My opponent had about 20. Unfortunately, what I saw was that 92% of the money that had come into her campaign over the last 6 years came from union and special interest PACs. So as I was raising money at 400,000 plus, I was seeing $50,000 contributions from operators' unions. And we knew we wouldn't be able to keep up with that to get the message out. So I did write that check. I know my wife's in the audience and she'd like to have that check back. And that meant that others could put money into our campaign. Everybody who's put money into my campaign knows where I stand on all the important issues. And I know we're going to talk about those issues today. I would love to change the system.
Thank you, Mr. Lesser. Small donor matching.
We need term limits. I mean, the problem is very clear. The people in Springfield who are making these decisions are professional politicians. We need term limits. I, if elected, will serve no more than 8 years. I also will refuse the pension. The legislators pay themselves a pension as well after, as I understand it, only 7 years of service. I will refuse the pension. I can tell you, of this panel, I am quite sure I have the smallest budget here. The problem is that the money is causing people to do things, and it needs to be reformed in such a way, but the key way is get the professional politicians out of Springfield, make the legislature, as it was intended to be, a citizen legislature. And if we had that, I think a lot of the campaign problems and the finance problems and the ballooning budgets would be resolved. That is the simplest and easiest way to solve these problems. People tell me, well, don't we have elections? Aren't that kind of like a term limits? No, it's not. Incumbency is a tremendous tool and advantage in any kind of an election. And when you have a guy like Mike Madigan, who's been in there since 1971, you really have to ask yourself, is he really representing the people of the state of Illinois or just himself? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan on small donor matching.
I do support a small donor matching program and laws and regulations behind that. I don't think anybody in this room would disagree that money has corrupted politics, but also our government. It changes the identity of the people that have access to run for office and have commitments to public service. The idea that we have to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in some competitive races, millions of dollars for a state legislative race, it undermines our democracy. It undermines your voice, because the dollar becomes much more valuable than your vote. So I strongly support a small donor matching program. I'm also proud to have over 850 donors since the beginning of this campaign. It's a grassroots campaign. I'm very proud of that. I think all of us on the stage are very proud of the contributions that have come into us, because it reflects who supports our values and who supports the values that we're espousing in this campaign to represent you in Springfield. So I think that that's an important step. I think that we need to take significant steps at the state level to make sure that we're no longer allowing large mega donors, particularly in the black market, on the super PACs that are not accountable to disclose who their big donors are. I think that's corrupting the system that we have, and we need to do better.
The next question, we start with Mr. Davey. It is on government consolidation. Are there any specific units of government that you believe could be consolidated or services shared with another entity in your area?
So I don't think it's a strange fact to most of us that the state of Illinois has over 7,000 local units of government. That makes us the most in the country. As I mentioned before, simultaneously we have 653 police and fire municipal pension funds. There's a consistent amount of ineffectiveness and inefficiency here. I think that the broader question is what kind of a community do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a community where your schools are well funded, where the social services that we all need are well funded, that public safety and transportation and infrastructure are well funded? In my mind, those are the four big pillars of a state government, and that a state government should provide for those things and should provide an overarching level playing field so that we can build businesses and transact commerce and build economy and create community and plant roots to wrap that all up so that people stay here. And so from a local government perspective, in terms of units of government, many of those problems get solved when the state actually does what it's supposed to do efficiently and effectively, and it comes down to local governments.
Thank you. Mr. Lesser on government consolidation.
I completely agree with Barrett that we have an insane number of local governments in Illinois. We have more local governments than Texas does, than California does, than states with far larger populations. We also have, as I mentioned a little while ago, the worst credit rating in the country of all of the states. Coincidence? I think not. This is obvious. We have tremendous inefficiencies built into our system. Now, there are advantages to having all of these local organizations in that they are, at least in theory, more locally responsive, and they are at least focused on their tasks. But the problem is they have proven to be inefficient on a larger level. And I should mention, by the way, most, if not all of them, get pensions. They are there. They are. Want to pick out one particular one? I have a mosquito abatement district. I live in a mosquito abatement district. Why can't the Lake County take care of mosquito abatement? Why can't the village of Lake Bluff take care of mosquito abatement? Of course they can. They already have all the equipment. They're already able to do it. But instead, we have a separately elected body that does this. It is, by its nature, very inefficient. We have townships in areas that are fully incorporated, which serve very little function other than to provide somebody with a salary and a pension. This has been a problem for Illinois, and we need to streamline government on all levels, one of which is we need to consolidate these groups. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan.
I think that we have to have a balanced approach while we're looking at what government units we have and government employees that we have. But we have to be honest with ourselves that 6,800 units of local government is extreme, under any measure, by anybody, anywhere. So we have to look at the ways in which we're creating governments, the way we're supporting our governments, but to me the most important thing is what are those local governments doing? There are functions, as many of you know, in our township level where they're providing food pantries for those that need it in our communities, both West Deerfield Township, Moraine Township, Shields Township. These communities are being served by those township governments. So the flip side of that is we have to make sure that the pensions aren't elevated in a way that isn't controlled. So we have to make sure that our local governments are being operated in a way that the state has some oversight with the pension system, because that's really what's driving up our big costs. So we need to make sure that more and more units are joining the IMRF, the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, that has a really strong funding ratio and that's not crushing our pension systems. So I think we have to really do a responsible job to protect the services that we get and we need, and we provide for those that need it. I think that that's an important thing that shouldn't be done with a hatchet, but should be done in a responsible way so that local communities can make decisions for themselves, especially in those that are really being targeted by significant municipal taxes.
Thank you. Mrs. Morrison on government consolidation.
Specifically, there's a couple. Mosquito abatement districts, I do agree with one of the previous speakers. That work is contracted out. There are elected boards that manage that, but I think that is a very easy place to consolidate government. Drainage districts, look at your tax bill. You're going to see drainage districts. Who are those people? What are they doing with your dollars? How did they get there? Those people are actually elected in September on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It is an antiquated, archaic law. We can dissolve those, and those should be taken care of by county. And thirdly, I was in township government, and I would tell you there is a place that is prime for consolidation. Depending on where you are in the state, you might not even need a township. Downstate, it's a different situation than it is in a suburban area. I believe that should be done county by county, but our assessment, at least in Lake County, where many of us are from, and Cook County, a lot of that, most of that is available online. The need for an assessor to sit in his office, that's not needed anymore. Roads, unincorporated roads, should all be consolidated under the county or under one other entity. It's very expensive to maintain the equipment, the storage, and the personnel to do that. There are places we can cut, and we should, but it should be done on a county-by-county basis.
Thank you. For question 5, we're back to starting with Mr. Lesser, and this is campaign finance again. Has your campaign accepted any money from the NRA or its 501c4 arm, the Institute for Legislative Action, ILA?
Boy, that's a quick one. No. Let me actually, and I do want to go on actually, because this is a very relevant topic. I am unusual among Republicans in that I am a socially moderate person. I do not share a lot of beliefs with some of the National Party people. I believe that a woman should have the right to choose. I believe that a woman, I believe that the government should not be intruding in these areas. I am socially, as I say, a very moderate person, including on guns, including on gay marriage, including on many of these issues where I think we should keep an open mind. And I think that a woman's right to choose is the law of the land and should remain the law of the land. Thanks.
Mr. Morgan. And the question is on funding from the NRA or the 501c4 associated with them, the Institute for Legislative Action.
No, I'm not receiving any funding from the NRA or any related 501c3, nor would I accept any of that funding. I think it's really important to talk about, again, values, because there is a significant difference that we're ignoring if we don't talk about what our Republican and Democratic Party values are right now. After the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting last year, where dozens of people were killed, 2 weeks later, the Lake County Republican Party had their annual event in which they literally auctioned off an AR-15 assault weapon. That was the Lake County Republican Party. Not Lake County, Indiana, Lake County, Illinois. And I think that that's an important discussion to have, because for somebody who's going to go down to Springfield to represent you, are you going to have somebody who's going to fight for gun dealer licensing bills, making sure that we're stopping the flow of guns coming from Wisconsin and Indiana? Or are you going to be auctioning off AR-15s?
Thank you.
I'm sorry if it's not avoided.
Sorry, it is not. Excuse
The Lake
me,
County
sir.
Republican Party did not do that.
Excuse me. Mrs. Morrison, it is your turn. I know, but it was not his turn. Mrs. Morrison?
I've been a champion for gun violence prevention in Springfield. This last spring, we passed a red flag bill, which will go a long ways to keeping guns out of the hands of people who are mentally ill and are a danger to themselves or others. I've gotten an F rating from the NRA. No, they are not going to give me money. And I'm really proud of that. And I'm really proud of that grade. I'm also a sponsor on the 72-hour waiting period, gun dealer licensing, and assault weapon ban. We have a lot of work still to do in Springfield, but I am going to tell you one of the most surprising things is the strength that the NRA has in Springfield. The money, the clout, the push they have. You want to make sure that whoever you send to Springfield has been extremely clear and extremely transparent about what they will and will not support, because anything else less is going to be someone the NRA moves.
Thank you. Mr. Davey? NRA funding or ILA funding? Thank you.
So no, and in fact, our campaign has been run without PAC money, because we don't want PAC money. In terms of guns, I'm proud that Moms Demand Action last week named me a gun sense candidate. I believe in responsible gun ownership and reasonable restrictions. I support the 72-hour waiting period. I support bans on bump stocks and high-capacity magazines. Look, I grew up in a household with a dad who was a policeman. In fact, the last 15 years of his job, he was the head forensic investigator for the city of Chicago. So when we had dinner at the table, there was oftentimes a gun on the table. We grew up with guns. We grew up learning how to use them. We grew up respecting them. We live in a different world today. My 5th grade son and my daughters who are 3rd and 1st grade go to school now, and there are signs on the walls that tell them what to do when there's an active shooter on site. That's just not right. So I'm here to protect our communities, and again, I'm proud that Moms Demand Action identified me in the way they did this past week.
Question 6, we will begin with Mr. Morgan. And it's a two-part question, which are related. The first part is gerrymandering chips away at democracy. What would you do about it? And the second part is what state legislation would you support and promote to expand and enforce voter access? So gerrymandering and voter access, Mr. Morgan.
I'll handle it one at a time. So gerrymandering is certainly an issue both at the state and federal level. If you've ever looked at a political map in Illinois for a district, you will find some really funky things. You'll find maps that are not contiguous. You'll find maps that go dozens and dozens and dozens of miles just to draw out a little finger. So both parties are certainly responsible. At the federal level, we've seen what happens when states vote predominantly one party, but the representation in Congress is another. So I support legislation that's going to prevent that kind of gerrymandering here in the district, at least for our district. Our district is a rectangle, pretty much goes straight up along Lake Michigan. And is pretty straight line. So from that sense, I'm proud of the district that we're looking to represent, but I think there's so much more that we need to do down in Springfield. Secondly, dealing with state legislation to expand voter access. I have been active in voter protection efforts for years to make sure that those that are trying to vote are not disenfranchised. Predominantly in the northern part of this county, we've had many years, as recently as 2014, where individuals, because of the color of their skin, were found predominantly and increasingly to be given provisional ballots because of the color of their skin. That's a voter access problem. There's voter education to make sure this district is blessed with a really high voter turnout. That's great, but we need to do more throughout the state. We need to make sure there's lots more access.
Mrs. Morrison?
I broke from my party this year when I became the sponsor for Senate Joint Resolution Constitutional Amendment number 26, which is legislation which would end gerrymandering as we know it today, which would create an independent commission, which I think a lot of the League of Women Voter folks have studied and are aware of. I was very proud to work for the first year with a Republican representative from Peoria and a coalition of people from all over the state who believe that it should not be politicians who sit in a dark room with the shades down who design and create the districts. It should be voters. So I am here to tell you that we have 39 senators of the 59 who joined me in that effort in the first year. This is legislation I'm going to continue to push very hard. Sometimes big change takes more than 1 year. Sometimes it takes a couple years. Sometimes it takes more. But this is an effort that I believe my district cares about, that I believe is fair, and that I believe is right. And the second part of the question, very, very similar to what Mr. Morgan said. We need to make sure that we are not disenfranchising people who are eligible and qualified to vote. And I would like to see more legislation that provides and more policy that allows for voting by mail.
Mr. Davey, gerrymandering and voter access.
So I think Mr. Morgan's right. This is a problem that's been created and caused by both parties. There are no clean hands in this issue. I actually believe that gerrymandering and term limits and maybe the 24-hour news cycle too are like the three worst things for our country because they divide us, they tear us apart, they pull us in different directions. The challenge in our district, these gentlemen are in a box, but the broader Senate district is one of the most interesting districts you'd ever take a look at. I don't know if you've looked at the map. We go from North Chicago down to Glencoe, and we go all the way out to Palatine in a really interesting, funky L shape. It's been gerrymandered significantly. I think the challenge here is that gerrymandering, like term limits, and I won't serve more than 2 terms either, like my colleague down at the end, is something that politicians like to talk about supporting. But to my opponent's point, 39 people voting for this or co-sponsoring this bill, but we can't get it passed. We can't get it passed because the head of the Senate is holding it. And that's the case with a lot of important legislation that's important to this district. So being effective is not confusing activity with achievement. The achievement is that we passed the law, and the achievement should be driven by not supporting leaders who won't do the will of the people. And that's what's happening. I continue to reiterate, this is the most educated Senate district in the state of Illinois. We deserve a lot better.
Thank you, Mr. Lesser, on gerrymandering and voter access.
Speaker Mike Madigan likes drawing the map. He's an artist with it. He drew it very well after the 2010 election. He drew it after the 2000 election. He has done a great job of drawing the map so that he maintains the majority. And he has been very effective in that. It is critical to the future of the state of Illinois that we end this practice of the politicians choosing the voters rather than the voters choosing the politicians. I am strongly in favor of creating a nonpartisan commission which will create the districts with a blind eye to party and to voting. We need this desperately in Illinois. The problems that we have had are primarily because we don't have term limits. We have professional politicians who are running the state, and they're running it for their own benefit. If we had citizen legislatures, if we had term limits, then we wouldn't have this problem. And that is, I think, one of the number one things that we would like to accomplish is a nonpartisan commission to draw the maps in the future after the 2020 census. With regard to access, I'm a deputy voter registrar myself. I've registered people to vote. I think it's very important. I want to be sure that everybody who wants to vote gets that opportunity. Thank you.
Mrs. Morrison starts off on the next question. What is your stance on guns in schools?
I am completely against having teachers armed in schools, and teachers that I have talked to said, please, don't ask me to have a gun. That being said, it's very important, and unfortunately, I have a grandson who is a kindergartner, and this is a year that he's going to learn about active shooter drills at his school in Lake Forest. One of the things we passed that I sponsored and became a law this summer was an active shooter drill bill. Everybody knows what tornado drills is. Every school does it. Now, unfortunately, we're going to require every public school, every school to have an active shooter drill. But this bill was developed with the help of the Illinois Terrorism Task Force, and it sets forth the protocol and the training that will go into that, and it has local law enforcement assisting the principals. We need to keep our kids as safe as possible. Arming teachers is not the way to do it.
Thank you. Mr. David, guns in schools.
Yeah, I agree with my opponent. We should not arm teachers. When you run for office, you spend a lot of time talking and learning and listening, and we're fortunate here in this district in Northbrook, District 27, to have a great superintendent and a really great group of people who have designed a program called EPP 27, Emergency Preparedness Plan 27. It's kind of a first of its kind in the nation. And they're out actually teaching other schools about it, and it brings together law enforcement as well as synagogues, churches. It creates a communications plan for dealing with not only gun violence but all kinds of disasters. One of the things that I learned in the process was, though, that because of the funding challenges we have here in the state, because our state government inefficiently spends its money, that we're short on resources at the local level. Go figure. Anybody look at their property tax bills lately? And one of my first bills when I'm elected will be to create some cost sharing that allows us to free up some funds that will help some of the schools in our district implement what they're doing in Northbrook, because I think it's really great work and everybody needs to know about it. And I think our kids and our communities are, keeping them safe is critical. So, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Lesser?
I think I'm actually 4 for 4 up here. I don't want to see teachers armed either. That's, I think, a terrible idea. I can't even imagine. It is, however, critical that we keep the kids safe. And it is necessary and critical that they have safe access in and out of schools and getting to schools as well. But it is also equally necessary that the state and the federal government share in the burden of this cost, and it not be simply passed along as yet another unfunded mandate to the local schools. So I'm in favor, I'm certainly opposed to arming teachers, but I'm very much in favor of making the schools as safe as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, guns and schools.
The question about arming teachers, I think, at least on this panel, we all agree that's not the solution. But the real question is, how are we going to keep our community safe? And the ways in which we are facing constant, consistent, regular school shootings throughout this country, locally, what we saw in Parkland, and the ways in which that's changed the lives of the young people that are attending not just high schools, but junior highs and elementary schools. The idea that that's the environment and that's the world that we want to raise our kids, we have to do something about it. We have to address these problems. And it's not a simple solution. There's no silver bullet to stop school shootings. But I'll tell you where we can start. We can start with making sure that we are fully funding mental health and substance abuse supports throughout the state and the country. We have to really focus on the access to guns and weapons. We have almost enough guns for every single person in the US. And the idea that that's going to allow us to keep ourselves safe by having more guns is absolutely not the solution. And we need to address this problem holistically to make sure our families are safe, our community is safe. And again, it's holistic. It's making sure our schools are hardened, making sure we're fully supporting substance abuse and mental illness funding, and making sure we're providing those services to our community, and making sure our kids are safe.
We're going to start with Mr. Davey on the next question. We are actually sticking with schools, though. What is your opinion on school vouchers and the financial plan for schools?
So as I mentioned previously, I had the opportunity, and still continue to serve on the board, but had the opportunity to help build an organization here called Bernie's Book Bank. Early child education is critical from my perspective in changing the trajectory of kids' lives in America. And it's why I've worked in that area. The challenge in Illinois is that in 1971, the state provided 60% of our local school budgets. 60%. And today that's 28%. We're last in the nation in funding schools. What does that mean? It means that there are communities where, even with the new funding laws that we just enacted, even with those laws, there are communities that will continue to suffer. So there are communities that have a need for other approaches to providing for those children. And that comes in the form of government assistance, it comes in the form of public-private partnerships, it comes in the form of some of these new schools, and it comes in the form of nonprofits like Bernie's who get involved. And I'm a big supporter of looking at every option to ensure that our kids can be reading ready in kindergarten and read at grade level in 5th grade. Because when we lose kids who can't read at grade level in 5th grade, and there are 10 million of those children between birth and 6th grade who live below the poverty line in the United States every year, 60% of those kids are going to be homeless, incarcerated, or on public assistance. That's the big picture issue, and we need solutions for that.
Thank you. Mr. Lesser on school vouchers and funding schools.
The system has changed in that we are now, the state is spending much less as a percentage towards the schools than it did 40, 50 years ago. And this has been a problem in that the burden has been shifted to local real estate taxes. In our area in particular, almost entirely, the schools are supported by the local real estate taxes. The problem here, and this in turn, is causing our property values to drop in this area. We have lost ground. You know, of all things, people invest in their homes. That should be a good investment. We want people to buy homes. We want people to live with their families. But when the home loses money every year, and that is what is currently happening in Lake County, this is a big disincentive to people to move here and to use our wonderful schools and to use these opportunities. Now, I will tell you, I'm certainly in favor of school vouchers, but I'm also in favor of the new plan that was just recently passed that allows a tax credit in a pilot program for certain schools, private schools. And I think that's a good idea as well. I think we need to have a robustly funded school, but we also need to reduce the costs in operating them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Every dollar that we appropriate or allow for a tax credit for a school voucher for private school is a dollar that's not going to public education. So to address the issues that many of us have spoken about today, we have a shortage of resources for the single thing that is the greatest decider of someone's opportunity, greatest decider of someone's future, which is education and a quality education, which today is dividing people based on their zip code and where they're born. That is just unbelievable. That's not the way that we believe we should be acting as a society. We need to be prioritizing the funding for schools. We do so in this district. We pay a very high price for it, but it's why we move here, because our children are the biggest asset that we have, and the education we provide for them is the best access we can provide for them to have a better future than we have for ourselves. So I don't support public school vouchers, private school vouchers. I support public education, and we need to do more to support that too.
Mrs. Morrison.
Somebody asked a very simple, straightforward question. Do you support vouchers or not? As opposed to my opponent who didn't give you an answer, I think you deserve one. I am not in favor of vouchers. I think that our public school system is where we should be focusing, and in fact, in the last year, we have passed legislation that is going to reformat how we do our school funding. An extra $350 million from the state is going into our schools. That's K-12, and an additional $50 million is going into early childhood education, because we know that if we can intervene with very young children, we can really change the trajectory of how they will perform in grade school and high school and beyond. I'm not in favor of vouchers.
The next question, we're going to start with Mr. Lesser, and it's on the Electoral College. If presented to the states, will you vote in favor of ratifying a U.S. constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College system for electing the President and Vice President of the U.S. and replace it with a one-person, one-vote system?
Well, I must say, that's certainly a different proposal. I'm not aware that that's currently likely to get passed through the United States Senate or the United States House by anywhere near the numbers that would be required to abolish the Electoral College. I will tell you, I think that there are some good things about the Electoral College. It has served us well for 200 plus years, which is no small accomplishment. On the other hand, yes, obviously the Electoral College has its built-in inequities in that smaller states are given a greater say in comparison to larger states, but larger states still have a greater say than the smaller states do. I would say that no, I am opposed to repealing the Electoral College. No. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, on the Electoral College?
I do support a one-person, one-vote change to the way that we manage our elections. Sadly, I think what happened in Washington, D.C. this last week shows us the outsized power and authority and influence of a small number of states on the direction of the rest of us and the majority of the states. And we have to change the ways in which elections are disenfranchising people based on where they live, because it discourages voting, which we talked about earlier. We need to find ways to empower people and engage people to vote more, not the other way around. And this, if we don't change the system, we're going to increasingly see elections where the popular vote is won by one party, but they end up with more seats. The courts have stepped in a number of states where the gerrymandering we talked about earlier, places like Pennsylvania, where the Republicans were ending up with a ridiculous number of congressional seats, where the Democrats were winning the popular vote by a large margin in that state. So I do support one person, one vote, and there's so many more things we need to do to encourage voting and empower those that want to be a part of this civic process.
Thank you. Mrs. Morrison on the Electoral College.
This is one of the first conversations I've heard about this in a public setting. I've had coffee with people and chatted about it, but this is quite simply something I would ask all of my constituents to weigh in on and let me know where they are on it. Right now I see both sides, and I don't have an answer for you.
Thank you. You just picked up some time there. Mr. Davey.
More questions. I think, as Mr. Morgan said, the root here of the problem, in many respects, is gerrymandering, fair maps, the need for fair maps, term limits. The issue has been debated about the Electoral College for a long, long time. Quite frankly, I'm focused on the state of Illinois. I'm focused on Springfield. I'm focused on the fact that this should be the best state in the United States. We're sitting next to the largest body of fresh water on earth. We have the best farmland on the planet. History and geography have created the intermodal transportation hub of the Western world. We have 36 Fortune 500 companies in this state. We have more colleges and universities in the metro area of Chicago than any city in the United States outside of Boston. We have incredible resources in abundance. In fact, I was just sitting with John Sentel, who runs Open Lands, and he told me that Illinois is second to California in the United States in terms of resource, habitat, biodiversity. This is an incredible place. Unfortunately, we have what we talked about earlier. We have the worst debt. We have the worst tax liability and burden. We have the worst credit rating. We have the worst outmigration of our population, and 60% of those people leaving our state are millennials, our kids who are going to college and leaving and not coming back. This is an amazing place, and we want to build a home and plant roots and build community here and have a place that we can come back to, that we can depend on in the future.
Thank you. We're going to start with Mr. Morgan on the next question, which is on gun violence prevention. What is your position on banning the manufacture, sale, and possession of assault weapons in Illinois?
I'm a strong supporter of an assault weapon ban, not just at the local level, which I've been supportive of, as Highland Park and Deerfield and Northbrook have fought through those regulations, but more importantly to me at the state level. We have some terrific legislators pushing gun safety laws, common sense gun safety legislation, like Julie Morrison in Springfield, and we haven't yet gotten there. As a state, we haven't yet gotten around to passing a gun dealer licensing bill, where we're treating gun dealers, they're selling guns, less restrictive than a real estate agent, or a boxing referee, or a cosmetologist. And that is putting our children at risk. So I'm a strong supporter of an assault weapon ban in Illinois. I'm proud to be a gun sense candidate and be supported by different gun safety groups, because it is important and it matters. It matters what we're talking about in front of our children. It matters what we're doing as a community to fight against the gun violence that is an epidemic here throughout the state. So we need to be doing more. We need to start today. We need to push for these laws in Springfield, and we need to continue to move the ball forward to make sure our communities are safe, and we're doing what we can do to prevent the illegal transactions of guns across our borders, where it's easier to get fireworks and guns across our borders than it shouldn't be. We should be treating this like a serious issue and like the epidemic that it is.
Thank you. Mrs. Morrison on an assault weapons ban, please.
I'm the Senate sponsor for the assault weapon ban, and I will continue to work on that until we get that passed and signed into law. There is no reason for military-grade weapons like that to be in the hands of anyone in the state of Illinois besides military and law enforcement. So some of my colleagues, as I've worked this bill, have said to me, well, it's so hard, though. How do we know which town? You know, Highland Park has a ban, but what about Wilmette? And what if I drive across into Winnetka, et cetera? So let's have a statewide ban. I'm tired of fighting with them. Let's do a statewide ban and do it right. I am really proud to be the only candidate in this race that is endorsed by Giffords, by the Gun Violence Prevention PAC, and by Moms Demand Action.
Mr. Davey on assault weapons ban.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm also proud of the support for Moms Demand Action. I believe in responsible gun ownership with reasonable restrictions. I support gun dealer licensing. I support 72-hour waiting periods. I support a ban on bump stocks. I support a ban on high-capacity magazines. What I really support is what's happened here in Deerfield and in Highland Park and in Highwood and possibly Northbrook, which is doing this law at a local level. And I support that because I believe that we are legislating for the entire state. And I think when we live in our communities and I can call the police and they can be there in 10 seconds, it's a little different than if somebody who lives in a community downstate where it may take 20 or 30 minutes. I don't know what that's like yet. Maybe I'll have a better perspective on that when I get to Springfield.
Mr. Lesser on an assault weapons ban, please.
Thank you. I also agree that bump stocks should be banned. I don't know why that hasn't already been done. If it's illegal to have an automatic weapon, then why is it legal to have a device that can turn a semi-automatic into an automatic? Obviously, that should be illegal. I also am in favor of the 72-hour waiting period. I'm in favor of the gun dealer licensing law. You know, these are all, I think, common sense. There is, however, limits on what we can do because of the Second Amendment. That is a federal law. As my opponent points out, you know, it's very easy for somebody who wants to get a gun, even no matter what ban we put on in Illinois, it's hardly difficult to go to Wisconsin or Indiana and buy a gun there. It's actually very easy to do. Any kind of effective firearms regulation has got to be done on a national basis, on a U.S.-wide basis. And I do commend both Highland Park and Deerfield for trying to find out what are the restrictions that the local municipalities can place on these. But as a practical matter, anyone who wants to get a gun can very easily go to either Wisconsin, Indiana, or plenty of other places and get one. And until that is changed, we are just nibbling at the edges, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Thank you. We start with Mrs. Morrison on the next question, which is on the environment. What would you do to assure water quality, protect property and the environment, and what can be done on the local and state levels to stop the reversal of protective environmental legislation at the federal level?
That's kind of a timely question because currently my office is the lead office on bringing together stakeholders at the federal and state level to look at the Des Plaines rivershed. That's an area, Mount Prospect, Prospect Heights, Wheeling, that has suffered from flooding for years and years and years. Now there are grave concerns with all the stakeholders in those communities and downstream that with Foxconn getting some exemptions for both input and outflow of water from Lake Michigan, that we are going to be in grave jeopardy of really exacerbating the flooding already in place. So the Stormwater Management Commission from Lake County has commissioned a study. It will be finished, we think, the last week of October. And so I've invited the U.S. senators, our U.S. reps, because this is a federal issue. All the mayors, all the local electeds, and community members to come and listen to what we are going to hear from hydraulic engineers to talk about what is really at stake here. So it's very concerning. There is a compact that the Great Lakes states have on how much water you can draw out. This is not an unlimited resource. The fresh water there takes care of so many hundreds and millions of people in the Midwest. We need to protect, we need to respond to this, this gross overuse of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davey, on protecting the environment at the state and local levels.
Yes, so I'm in agreement with my opponent and appreciate the work that she's doing. As I said earlier, the resources that we have here in this state make us, an incredibly valuable place in this world. It means that this should be a center of commerce forever. It means it should be a place people come to forever. Where I may depart from my opponent is that I think that that work is good work, but the bigger picture issue here is that we have got a state that is out of control financially. The social safety net, the environment, the things that are important for all of us so that we can have quality lives, that's under assault because we don't have the money to pay for things. The reason we don't have the money to pay for things is because our budget this year, $38 billion, almost over 50% of it has gone to pension payments and debt service because of our worst in the nation credit rating and Medicaid reimbursements, where we should be getting more federal funding. We have big issues that have to be tackled. We have important issues. They're existential. They're issues that are driving people out of our state. And unfortunately, if we don't fix those issues in the next 5 years, we're not going to have money to deal with any of these problems that we have. We're not going to have it. And I want everyone to be thinking about that because this should be the best state. It's why we're here. And it's why we want to stay here. It's why we want to plant roots and build community here.
Thank you. Mr. Lesser, please, on environmental legislation.
Barrett is absolutely correct. When you live in a bankrupt state, it's very difficult to find the funds to do important things like protecting the environment. We are very fortunate. We have so many blessings in this area, number one of which to me is Lake Michigan. The fact is we have we have a tremendous amount of fresh water immediately available. We have all of these wonderful rivers and streams. We have a tremendous environmental area. And we need to do everything we can to pass that along in a pristine condition to our next generation, to my grandson, and to others. The problem we're facing with this, though, is that we don't have any money. Why? Because the state of Illinois intentionally overpays for things. This is why. There's a law called the Prevailing Wage Act. It says that any time that the government is going to contract out work, including environmental work or any other, that they will pay wages on a set scale, an artificially created scale that is sent from Springfield rather than fair market prices. This is one of the reasons why our state is bankrupt, our property taxes are so high, because rather than provide services on the most efficient and cost-effective manner, the state of Illinois, as a policy, makes it more expensive, and that is hurting our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to start with Mr. Davey.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Morgan. I'm sorry.
My answer was so
Fixing
good.
My problem.
Thank you.
I knew it had to happen at some point.
It's okay. The ways in which we're protecting or not protecting our environment, again, becomes a question of values. I appreciate the Republican intrinsic response to talk about the state being broken and not having money to protect our environment. The problem is the Illinois EPA is self-funded. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, that's tasked with protecting our air and our water and protecting pollution from Wisconsin, has nothing to do with the state budget. It has to do with an abdication of responsibility under the Rauner administration to protect our environment. Our Illinois The Illinois EPA has gone from enforcing and attacking polluters to supporting pollution. That sounds dramatic because it is. When Wisconsin is looking to build Foxconn, which is great that there's going to be new jobs and new development, they're taking water, literally from Lake Michigan, in order to send that water back to Lake Michigan polluted. Not only is Wisconsin supportive of that, Illinois' EPA is supportive of that. That's why it really matters to talk about values of whether or not we're protecting our environment, whether or not we really truly believe and will follow through with action to protect the environment for our children and our generations after that. Thank you.
And now we actually go to Mr. Davey with the next question. This is also a two-parter. Part A, these both on immigration. Would you support or oppose legislation providing access for undocumented students to grants and scholarships at state universities, and please explain. And the second part is, would you support or oppose restrictions on police communications with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement? Please explain.
I might need you to read the second part after the first answer. Look, I think more broadly, and I said this before, you know, my mom was a Polish immigrant who came through Ellis Island. I'm a first-generation American. When a number of folks, including Mayor Rodering and Mrs. Morgan and Mr. Morgan and Mrs. Morrison held a rally in Highland Park recently to talk about what was going on at the borders. I was the only Republican who was there. I was the only person there talking about bad immigration policy and calling out the Trump administration and our Congress to address the issue. I believe that we need to have responsible immigration policy. I believe that the people in this state who are here play an important role in that. I believe in providing support for the immigrants we have here. And as it relates to creating communication, quite frankly, what we found in the state of Illinois is that, again, we're so under-resourced, and I know you guys are tired of hearing that we're under-resourced, but I'm pointing to the facts that our police forces really need to spend their time fixing the problems that we have here locally and not focused on immigration issues.
Mr. Lesser, the two parts are undocumented students having grants and scholarships to state universities and police communications with ICE.
Okay. Thank you. We have some 11 to 12, nobody's sure, million people living in this country who have come here, yes, illegally. But they've been here for many years now, many of them. They are hardworking people. We need to integrate them into our society. I am very much in favor of what some people label as amnesty, but what I call it is I want people who are living here to be able to get mortgages, buy homes, have, pay into the tax system, contribute to 401ks, and enjoy all of the benefits that we legal citizens enjoy, including the vote, including all other areas. We need to get over this and to integrate and bring people in to our society. And this is a national problem, obviously, not just a state problem. With regard to the specifics, yes, I would like to see, there's no reason why someone who is undocumented should not be able to get access to public education in Illinois, including the higher education. I'm a University of Illinois graduate. I certainly enjoyed all of those, and I think that everyone else should have a fair opportunity as well. With regard to the sanctuary system, I think that just last year we passed a new state law, the Governor Rauner signed, that does create a buffer between the state and the federal immigration system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Morgan.
The idea that we are facing this challenge at the federal level with an administration that's hostile to all levels of immigrants, legal, those that came here illegally, people who were born here through parents who've been here for decades, that has become who we are as a country. I don't take that lightly. I think that as a nation, as a community, we need to be fighting for immigrants. We need to be fighting to make sure we are a place for those that are escaping persecution and genocide are able to arrive at our shores and maybe have the opportunities they were otherwise not going to have in the other countries. So I see what has happened, and it's become a really partisan issue. Immigration reform used to be a bipartisan goal, in DC at least. And lately, it's become much more of a talking point to talk about illegals, which is a code word. It's a code word for who we are as a community and whether or not we're going to judge people based on the color of their skin and disclose them or prevent them from having opportunities to survive and to thrive in this country. So I am supportive of the Trust Act that, as my opponent mentioned, was a bipartisan bill and signed by our governor. And I also think that we need to do more. I think as a country, we have so many different challenges. There are so many different things that we need to do to continue to be welcoming and allow those that are trying to escape persecution and genocide have a place to come to the United States of America.
Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. And after this, we will be moving into the closing statements.
This is still immigration, right?
Yes.
Okay. When we all read about the children who were separated at the borders from their parents and shipped around the country to different places, I noticed that there were some of those children who were actually being held in my district. And I made a visit to that site. It was a big deal to get in because the feds don't want you to go in. But with 8 of their folks supervising me, I was able to go in to a locked facility where these teenagers are being held in very sanitized conditions. I will tell you, I didn't see a lot of abuse or neglect going on, but these are kids who are stuck, who are not able now to be adopted, who are not able to be foster parented to somebody in Illinois because they are federal kids. One of the things that I intend to do is see if we can't change the DCFS laws to make sure that we are able to at least have those children as foster kids. And it is absolutely wrong that immigrants are afraid to go to the police, that they're afraid if they go in and talk about domestic violence in their home or some issue in the community that you and I wouldn't think twice about, they are deathly afraid that that is going to be what sends them into prison and to be shipped back to wherever they are fleeing. So, thank you.
Thank you. We are now going to move to the closing statements, which, as I said at the beginning, will be in reverse order to the opening statement. So we are going to start with Mr. Davey. 1.5 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Your participation here is part of being conscientious and caring about what we do here in the state. We're tired of friends leaving. We're tired of businesses that don't want to be here. We have incredible bounty. We have incredible resources. And I said before, this should be the best state in the country. Unfortunately, it's one of the worst. If you leave here, I hope you'll remember 3 things about me. I'm results driven, I take action, and then achieve. I don't confuse the two. We don't have a lot of time to solve some of these big financial challenges that we have. I'm a social moderate. We didn't talk about this, but I am pro-choice. I support a woman's right to choose, and I will fight for that woman's right to choose, especially based on what may happen at the federal level. I support reasonable gun restrictions, and I will fight for you as taxpayers. I believe in small business owners. My wife and I are both entrepreneurs who have built companies, and we believe that making those companies grow in a state like this will help us build a better future. We talked about this campaign being about this notion that it starts right here, it starts with me, it starts with you, it starts with all of us together. I'm asking for your vote. My background means that I will paint a bold vision, that I will bring people together, that I will drive action, and that we will do this together. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you. Mrs. Morrison, your closing statement, please.
I guess I'd like to just take a second to correct some of the information my opponent shared. I have over 900 individuals and organizations, and yes, PACs, that have contributed to my campaign. They don't all show up on state websites because they give $20 and $50. But since we're talking about the campaign and PACs, PACs are people, they're teachers, they're plumbers, they're people who contribute a few dollars here and there in order to have a stronger voice. And yes, I am proud of those people that I represent and that I work for in Springfield. A pro-choice candidate should not, cannot, it is unfathomable that you would take $300,000 from Dick Uihlein, who wants to criminalize abortion. I'm just not sure how you can call yourself pro-choice. and be evasive on some of the most important issues to this district. I am very, very proud to run on my record. I have been an effective, and if you want to talk about achievement, 41 bills signed just in this last session into law. That's achievement. I'm going to continue to be effective and work for you. I'm going to be an advocate for your values, and I hope that I can earn your vote for 4 more years. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, your closing statement, please.
Again, thank you so much for being here. My name is Bob Morgan. I'm the Democratic nominee for this position for state representative, and I'm so happy to be here. And you heard a lot about our positions, and I think you've seen quite a bit of difference between me and my opponent. And it's a real question of being an independent legislator. I will be an independent Democrat down in Springfield fighting for your values. I've been independent since the first day of this campaign, and I look forward to being an independent legislator down in Springfield, refusing to take any money or support or staff from Mike Madigan or party leaders. I think that distinguishes me for this campaign, because when you are faced with some significant issues, whether it's property tax reform or gun safety laws, I will be burdened and beholden to you, not to party leaders. That is who I am, and that's what I am going to be doing down in Springfield. I decided to run for office again because of what was happening in Springfield and DC and the ways they were failing to represent our values. I'll be fighting for health care reform and fighting to make sure that those that are not currently experiencing insurance are going to have access to it. Because health care is a right, not a privilege. I will be fighting for the woman's right to choose and making sure we have gun safety legislation in Illinois, making sure we're protecting the environment. Those are core values. And when time comes to push for the budget, when we pass that budget and I make sure we're not spending more than we have coming in, I will make sure to prioritize education and human services funding, because those are the values of this community. So again, thank you, and I ask for your support in November.
Thank you. Mr. Lesser, your closing statement.
Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I tell you, I've been a supporter of the League of Women Voters for many years. I think that putting on forums like this with elections to give people an opportunity to come out and hear the candidates and listen and address questions is the heartbeat of democracy. So thank you all for being here. I think you've got to give yourselves a round of applause. Now, I'm a small businessman. I think that it is, and I counsel business people. As a lawyer, that's what many of my clients are. It is critical that an organization, an entity, something like the state of Illinois, has to have its in equal its out on a regular basis. And when it is every year spending more than it is bringing in, that's a real problem. The state is bankrupt now. We currently owe at least $7.5 billion in bills which are currently due, which we do not have the money to pay. That's called bankruptcy. This state is in dire straits, and I need to bring that home to you because there is one particular reason for this. The state of Illinois, the General Assembly, is run by a guy named Mike Madigan. He is the Speaker. He has been the Speaker for 35 years now with a 2-year break. He has been there forever, and this is the problem. There is one critical difference. There's a number of critical differences between my opponent and myself. One difference is I will vote against re-election of Mike Madigan as Speaker of the House. We need change in Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we break, I want to thank our candidates for participating. And we can't have a democracy without candidates, and we can't have a democracy without voters. So please remember to vote. Please remember to take every eligible voter you know to the polls with you so they vote. Remember to serve as election officials. Remember to be poll watchers. Remember to volunteer on campaigns. Thank you very much. This ends this one, and please be back in the room in just like 3-4 short minutes. We're going to start again at 3:39. Everybody has agreed to the rules. Those of you who were here at the beginning know that all questions have to be written down. We are going to try to get to as many questions as we can. Put your hand up if you have a question. We can change the questions to combine them. If candidates respond to a question before it has been asked, some people in passing respond to something, that question, I don't ask that question because we usually run out of time. We have tossed a coin to see who starts, and Brad has chosen to start with the opening statement, which means that Doug will get to go first on the closing statement. And with that, if everyone could settle down. The timers in the front are going to have a 30-second and a stop. And I would really appreciate it if you stop when they say stop. And if you don't have a minute and a half worth of something to say, that's perfectly all right. You can take less time. All right, with that, we are going to get going. Thank you very much for coming. This is the 10th Congressional District of Illinois. And Brad, if you could start with your opening statement, please.
Thank you, and I'll stand up for the opening. But first, welcome. I appreciate all of you coming out on a rainy Sunday afternoon, but it's great that you're here. As the sign says in the front, democracy is not a spectator sport. Another one of my favorite terms is democracy is a verb. It's only as good as us who are involved in it. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank the League for hosting today, and I want to thank Deerfield High School for allowing us to do this in their auditorium. It's an honor to be representing this district. When I came back into office a year ago, January, I knew from experience that I might not get a second chance, and that brought a certain urgency. And I also knew that the only way we're going to get anything done is by reaching across the aisle and working together to tackle the problems we face as a nation. I'm proud in this term that I have helped introduce more than 50 pieces of legislation, of which more than half are bipartisan, and 4 pieces of legislation have made it to the President's desk to be signed into law. But it's not just the work we're doing in Washington, it's the work we're doing here at home. I am pleased to have put a great emphasis on constituent services. We have helped constituents regain more than $1.5 million from the federal government through our constituent services. And it's not just that we wait for folks to come to us. I've been out in the district. We've had more than 25 in-person town halls. Perhaps some of you have been a part of our more than 12 telephone town halls, and we're meeting people in new and different places. We've done 4 commuter town halls on buses and the trains. We even did a bike town hall. So I've been working hard. I look forward to hope to get your continued support. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Doug Bennett. We're running it here in the 10th. I appreciate you all coming out here and being engaged in the process. It's very important that we all do this. This is democracy in action. So many of you haven't met me, so I'll tell you something about myself because you've met Brad. I'm a computer consultant. I've spent 35 years solving difficult problems for Fortune 50 to 500 companies. I live here in Deerfield, near Clavinia, with my wife and 2 youngest. My eldest has gone through college. Why am I running? Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because what I've seen in Washington is dysfunction. I think we can do better than we're doing now. I watch a lot of basically grandstanding where people only care about whether they're part of the red team or the blue team. And when it comes down to it, they seem more interested in getting a 30-second campaign commercial than solving the problems that face our district. So I think on the issues that we care about, which is fixing our immigration system, reducing runaway college tuition costs, bringing healthcare expenses down, we know there are answers, and when I talk to people in the district, we get along, we can debate these answers, and somehow when they get on an airplane and they fly up in the air and they land in Washington, all that understanding, all the fact that we're all Americans here, all that goes away. And all they can see is the color of your jersey. And I think we need people who don't do that and who can stop doing that. And then we'll go to questions.
Thank you. Question 1, we will start with Brad, and this is, was the United States right or wrong in withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, and why?
Thank you. Is this working?
Yes, it is.
All right, great question. Short answer is the United States was absolutely wrong in withdrawing from the Accord. In fact, we are the only nation in the entire world that is not a part of the Accord. Actually, we still are. We cannot withdraw until 2019, but the President did withdraw us a year ago last spring. When he made that announcement, I was incensed, to say the least. and I led a effort. I was joined by more than 180 of my colleagues in condemning the President's decision with the resolution in the House. We have to take care of climate change. It is not a future threat to our world. It is a present danger to us today. We have seen it in the storms, whether it was last year in Texas or this year in North Carolina, but it's not just the United States. We're seeing it across the world. It's stronger and more intense storms, more frequent once-in-a-100-year storms. We're seeing it in the fires out in California and around the world. This is a threat to our planet. It's a threat to our children's future. We need to make sure that we join the world. In fact, we need to make sure that we lead the world in addressing climate change. China and India are investing trillions of dollars in new technologies to tackle this problem. If we don't make that investment, if we don't look to the future, we're going to cede our future to those countries. We have to address climate change, and we have to do it in conjunction with the rest of the countries in the world as part of the Paris Climate Accord. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug, on the withdrawing from the climate agreement.
While I support treaties and things like that, let me say that the Paris Climate Accord was flawed. What it did is it restricted and put limitations on U.S. companies, U.S. firms, and our life, but it did no such thing for China or India. There was no reason for them not to join the accord. It asked nothing of them. If we are truly to do anything about this issue, there is no way we can ignore the entire population of China and India, and that's what that accord did. It was more about saying that we signed something than getting something that worked. So until we come back to them and we negotiate something that addresses this with respect to the people, to two of the three largest countries on earth, nothing's going to get done. So I do agree that that accord was flawed and we should have pulled out of it.
Okay, the next question, we are going to start with you, Doug. What is your position on marriage equality and the administration's decision to deny visas to same-sex partners of foreign diplomats?
I believe that the Supreme Court owns 4 issues in this country, and that's gay marriage, abortion, gun control, and campaign finance reform. And that is the law of the land. And I believe that the Supreme Court has made it clear on that, regardless of my own personal opinions, and therefore I disagree with violating Supreme Court rules. So it's very simple. I disagree with that.
Thank you. And Brad, on that issue?
Thank you. Let me first touch on the issue of marriage equality. And I always tell the story when my wife Julie's here with me. When we got married in 1989, I'm one of 18 grandchildren on my mother's side, and my oldest cousin was moving out to California to be with his then partner because equality was not an option. And my grandmother said to my aunt at that time, "Why would you be any less happy for your son moving out to Seattle to be with the person he loves than you are for your nephew moving to Chicago to be with the person he loves?" That was 1989. My grandmother was an extraordinarily wise woman. Everyone in this country, everyone in this world should be able to make a life with the person they love, period. And I support marriage equality. Now, you may have read in the news this week that the administration announced that they were denying visas to the same-sex partners of diplomats if they weren't married. But only 13% of the countries in the world recognize marriage equality. That means they would be telling same-sex partners that you cannot stay in this country. Again, many things this administration does makes me incensed. This is one of them. You take action. On Friday, a letter that we drafted was joined by more than 100 fellow colleagues, fellow Democrats in the House of Representatives. We sent a letter to the Secretary of State saying this is wrong. These people should be allowed to stay here and live with the person they love. Because again, everyone should be able to make a life with the one they love, period.
Thank you. The next question, we start with you, Brad. What is your position on a woman's right to choose? And what is your position on repealing Roe v. Wade?
I believe that every woman has a right to make her own choice about her own body within the privacy of the conversations with her family and her doctor. I believe Roe v. Wade is the law of the land and should be upheld. And I believe we have to do everything we can to make sure that stays the law in every state in the country. That's what I'm committed to do in Congress. I'm 100% pro-choice. I'm proud to have the endorsement of Planned Parenthood and NARAL. I will always be pro-choice, and I will always fight for everyone in this country to have full, comprehensive health care. Health care is a right, not a privilege.
Doug, on your position on a woman's right to choose and Roe v. Wade, please.
Well, I don't believe for a second that Roe v. Wade will be overturned in the next 2 years or any time in the foreseeable future. But that's being said, I will tell you this.
Please let's listen to the candidate's responses.
I will tell you this. I will not support any law that is in contravention of Roe versus Wade. But people should remember that when you say Roe versus Wade and you read it, what that means is that a woman has a right to choose, but at some point, they have chosen. That's what it means. And I think the difference between Brad and I is not from banning it or allowing it, but where that point is. So that is the difference. And I think that Brad pretty much supports a women's right to choose, and you can contradict me if you want, at any point. All right? Then I'm willing to let him clarify that, and I'd love to know his position on that. That's fine. But anyway, so I support Roe versus Wade and the right to choose as guaranteed.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the candidates to please address your responses to either me or the people in the audience and not to each other. This is not a debate, it's a forum. Thank you. The next question, we start with Doug, and the question is on health care. What is your position with respect to health coverage for pre-existing conditions?
I think we need to do something better than we're doing now on health care with respect to pre-existing conditions. What we have done is we have almost made it illegal for insurance companies to run their business. And we see that in the fact that premiums are spiraling upward, and it's leaving more and more people with no chance to gain health care insurance. So I think what we need to do is think about innovative ways to handle the pre-existing condition problem without mandating it be the next insurance company's problem. And I think that there are different ways we can address, including making it the issue of the company you had the condition with when you got sick, that will help us resolve this in a way that doesn't put healthcare out of reach for many Americans and prevent us from having choices where most of Illinois only has one healthcare provider left.
Thank you. Brad, pre-existing conditions, please.
So let's take the broader question, which is the Affordable Care Act. I believe the Affordable Care Act was a great step forward. Was it perfect? No. But it was a step forward that in the richest country in the world, we should all be striving to make sure that everyone in this country has quality, affordable health care where they need it, when they need it. That was a step in the right direction. One of the things that the Affordable Care Act addressed was the fact that if you have a pre-existing condition, you could not be denied insurance. You get insurance that you afford. That was one of the great successes of the Affordable Care Act that we should be building upon, not trying to tear down. Everyone in this country deserves quality, affordable health care, as I've said already. But we need to make sure that the health care they get is not denied them simply because they are born with the condition, they are diagnosed with the condition over the course of life, they are diagnosed with the condition later in life. All of us know somebody who has a pre-existing condition. Statistically, half of us in this room have a pre-existing condition. Every one of us should know that we have confidence that we have access to insurance, that we'll always have quality health care, irregardless of that condition. I will fight for that. I have opposed every effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act, every attempt the Republicans have made to dismantle it, to defund it, to take it apart. But we need to be going forward, building on the success of the Affordable Care Act, fixing the problems that exist, and if problems can't be fixed, let's try new things. We have to constantly be working to make sure that healthcare in this world, in this country, is worthy of the people who live in this country. Thank you.
Okay. The next question is on immigration, and it's a two-parter, one broad and one less broad. Part A is, why is Congress unable to pass immigration reform? That's part A. Part B is, the current administration has drafted a proposed rule that would affect lawfully present immigrants who use public benefits or tax credits for which they or their dependents are eligible and would sharply increase the number who would find it more difficult, or you could say would make it harder for them to get a green card or renew a visa. What are your thoughts on this proposed public charge rule?
Thank you. I'm going to make it a three-part question. Just start with the general concept. We need comprehensive immigration reform in this country. We needed it yesterday. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says it would add $2 trillion to our economy over the next couple of decades, reduce our debt by hundreds of billions of dollars, but more importantly, it's the moral thing to do. It will take 11 to 12 million people out of the shadows, allow them to buy houses, start businesses, get the education they need to succeed. We should have passed this a long time ago. In 2013, the Senate passed a comprehensive immigration bill with 68 votes. It was bipartisan. I helped introduce the companion bill in the House of Representatives. To the second part of your question, why didn't that pass? It didn't pass because John Boehner refused to allow that bill to come to the floor. The Speaker of the House, Boehner, and now Paul Ryan, has been held hostage by a small group of extremists in the Republican Party who refused to allow any immigration bill to come to the floor for a vote. It may pass, it may fail, but our responsibility as representatives of our respective 435 districts is to cast that vote. And these few people in the House are denying us the right to do that. We need comprehensive immigration reform. As far as the third part of the question, what about the public benefits and what the administration is doing? This administration has time and again demonstrated its hostility to immigrants. Immigrants who have come here legally, immigrants who are seeking refuge here as asylum seekers, anyone who doesn't look like them. We are a country of immigrants. We have all come from different places. It makes our nation stronger. What the administration is doing is quite simply wrong.
Doug? Immigration reform in a broad way and also the public charge changes.
Question again.
Sure.
Thank you.
Why is Congress unable to pass immigration reform? And the current administration has drafted a proposed rule that would affect lawfully present immigrants who use public benefits or tax credits for which they or their dependents are eligible. It would make it much more difficult for them to get a green card or to renew a visa. What are your thoughts on this proposed public charge rule?
So let's go to the first question, which is why haven't anybody passed immigration reform? And there is a problem on both sides. And when 2017, there was a deal proposed which was relatively straightforward. Donald Trump wanted a wall, you may like it or not, and in return he offered all the DACA a green card. The Democrats sounded like they said yes, but inside their yes was a little thing that meant no. And a lot of times when you read inside these bills, you'll find yes means no when you get into the bottom of it. Basically, they said, if you give us the DACA people, we will later on go mile by mile through the entire southwest of the United States and decide later. That's not a deal. In order to get a deal done, you have to say yes to what your other side wants in order to get it done. When I go in business and we have stakeholders, we have to bring everybody to the table, but we have to be honorable and let each stakeholder get their part of it done. Now, I think we do need comprehensive immigration reform, but what we need is some real honesty on what we're doing and what we're buying, because time and again, when rubber meets the road and you have to satisfy all the stakeholders, even the ones you don't like, too many Democrats, and sometimes too many Republicans, to be honest, say no. And that's what's keeping us from moving forward. We need to have this done, and we need people who are willing to understand what it takes to get this finished.
Thank you. The next question, we are going to start with Doug, and it is on drug policy. Many states have legalized the use and selling of marijuana. Is this a federal question? And do you favor the legalization of marijuana on a federal basis?
I do not favor the legalization of marijuana. I've seen tobacco companies tell me that lighting up and smoking is not harmful to you. I remember growing up with smokers everywhere. I've seen drug companies tell me that opioids are completely safe. And now I see another group of people telling me that here's something that will obviously be totally harmless. And the people who are doing the studies are the people who make the money. And their main argument is you'll get a lot of money out of it as your state or your federal coffers. To me, that sounds like a bribe, and time and again, these companies that have promised you that their product does no harm have been deceitful. So no, I don't actually believe that this time putting burning plant material into your lungs at high temperatures is going to be good for you. I don't support legalizing something I think we all know is problematical or a danger. And this is a little personal because in my extended family, we've had people who have gotten themselves stuck in drug addiction, and it has damaged their lives forever. And I'm not really interested in making it easier for people to go there. So that's my answer, no.
Thank you. Brad?
Thank you, and I'll take this in a number of slices. First, I do believe this is a state issue. This is one of the strengths of our republic. We have 50 effective laboratories where we can develop and test policy and try to craft the right policy, and you see this happening across states, across the country in individual states. But you also have to separate the issue between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. On the medical side, we are dealing with an opioid epidemic. 72,000 people will die, or did die last year, it's estimated by the CDC. 72,000 people died of drug overdose. The opioid epidemic is affecting every one of our communities. It doesn't discriminate by race, political party, age, or income. We need to do something about this, and it may be, and we actually debated this in the Judiciary Committee, it may be that medical marijuana is an effective alternative for pain management for many people. This is something I think we should investigate. But the other aspect of our drug epidemic, or other aspect of the question, excuse me, is that we have an issue of mass incarceration, in particular of young people of color in this country. Many of whom, most of whom, are in prison for nonviolent drug crimes. It affects people of color, minorities, far more than it affects people in communities like here in Deerfield. We need broad criminal justice reform. We need to think about how do we effectively keep our communities secure and safe, and do it in a way that doesn't take young people and lock them up for the rest of their lives. This is a big question that needs broad thinking, bipartisan thinking across the aisle to address and make sure we have a justice system that reflects the values of our nation.
Thank you. We start with you, Brad, for the next one, and it's on congressional oversight. What do you think can be done by Congress to protect the Russia investigation?
This is a critical question. We need to make sure that the Mueller team is allowed to complete its investigation into Russian efforts to influence our 2016 election for a number of reasons. At the very first, it's that we understand what the Russians did so we can defend against it in the future. But we also need to make sure that if there is a reason to hold people to account, that those people are held accountable. But we need to make sure it's done based on the facts. The Mueller investigation has been done, in my impression, in a very professional way. In fact, you can raise your hand if you have heard any leaks from the Mueller team, and I know without asking, no one's going to raise their hand because there hasn't been a single leak. This team has gone about their business in a very cool, collected, professional way. We need to make sure they finish. As for what we can do, my colleagues and I in the Judiciary Committee have been working very hard to convince our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Republicans, to have hearings, to introduce legislation to protect the Mueller investigation. Unfortunately, in this hyper-partisan time, we have been blocked from making any progress on doing that. My hope is that in the next election, the Democrats can take control of the House, and as a part of that, not to do to them what they've done to us, but to stay focused on the facts that will defend our nation. The Russians acted against this nation in a form of aggression. We need to defend against it. We need to make sure that every American in this country knows that their vote will be cast with integrity and have confidence in the honest outcome of the counting of the total votes in the election.
Your view of congressional oversight to protect the Russia investigation.
Well, I believe in congressional oversight just like my colleague, and I think that we should let the investigation come to its conclusion. However, I've seen more investigations, and I remember the Ken Starr days, where we gave a prosecutor a budget and said, find a crime. And that's really not the way we do business here. What we need to say is, here's a crime, find out what happened. And that seems to me that after a while, a lot of these prosecutorial people lose track of what the original crime was that they were investigating and just look for results so that they can justify what they're doing. It's a reason we got rid of the special counsel and the special prosecutor laws, because they were abused by people, and admittedly, Republicans were guilty of that as well. And I think that going back to that kind of era is counterproductive, especially given how partisan the country has become and how unlikely that is to give results that will give us more confidence and not less in our own government. So I just wanted to say one thing about health insurance, and this is about Obamacare. I don't think it's one of our great successes. In essence, what we did is we restricted the supply of doctors by making their rewards smaller, and yet gymmed up the amount of people who wanted to buy or were in the health insurance marketplace, and we were told it would bend the cost curve. If you reduce the supply and increase the demand, you will definitely bend the cost curve, and everybody who's paying more for insurance now than they did 10 years ago
Thank you.
will see that.
We are probably going to have a question on health insurance and health care later, and maybe we could give the other person 30 seconds extra on that one. The next question, we start with you, Doug, and that is on Electoral College. Will you support a bill to propose a U.S. constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College system for electing the President and Vice President of the United States and replace it with a one-person, one-vote system? Doug.
No. The Electoral College exists to make sure that people need to campaign across this country. Without it, everybody would go to New York and California and just sit there in the media markets and stay there. And I've seen elections from, my first election I really remember was 76 to the present, and I've seen states change, and the battleground states that people say, oh, here are the battlegrounds, they're always different. Nevada was never a battleground before. California was a hardcore Republican state. Over time, states change, and forcing candidates, particularly presidential candidates, to represent vast swaths of the United States is key. I think that allowing people to be very parochial and only talk to certain urban areas would be counterproductive to our system. And also, the Electoral College is one of the ways we reduce fraud, because any kind of fraud would be restricted to a small state, and if your state had one party control of it, it would probably be voting for that party in any event. So I think most of these ideas lead us to worse places, and messing with the Constitution because we didn't like the results of the last election is not a good idea.
Thank you. Brad, a minute and a half if you need it on the Electoral College.
Thank you. Look, we have to have this conversation. Our last few elections, the winner of the popular vote has not been the one who won the electoral vote. We are in a demographic change in this country where in the next 20 years or so, it's estimated that 70% of the country's population will live in only 15 states. What that means on the Senate side is that 30% of the population in those other 35 states are going to elect 70% of our Senate. We have to tackle these issues. As far as supporting a specific bill without seeing the language, I can't speak to that bill. What I can say is we have to have this conversation. We are one of the last democracies in the world that doesn't have direct election of our leader. We are a changing demographic, as I said, from rural to urban. We're seeing the outcome of that in our elections. We need to decide what's the best way to go forward. I'm happy to have that conversation. It's something that needs to take place in our Congress, but also in our communities and forums like this.
The next question, we will begin with Brad, and it asks, as a federal congressperson, do you see having any kind of role in helping with Illinois' fiscal problems? And if so, specifically, what can a congressperson do to help?
Thank you. Well, the first thing, I'll say I'm only aware of federal congresspeople, but I am one of those. The first thing we should be doing is trying not to make the matters worse. And the Republican tax bill that passed last December does just that. By eliminating or restricting the state and local tax deduction, it was an intentional effort to penalize states like Illinois, California, New York, states that rely on property taxes. So the first thing we have to do is stop making it harder. We in Illinois do have a large tax burden. We were joined just recently. My son just walked into the auditorium. As a parent of 2 young boys, I want this to be a state where our kids will come home, to be the magnet that draws people back from around the Midwest and around the country, and attracts countries from around the area, around the world, to create quality, well-paying jobs here. We need to make this a dynamic place to work, live, and play. I say that not as a member of Congress, I say that as a citizen of this state. But both in Congress and within the state, the only way we're going to tackle these problems is by stop yelling at each other across the aisle and finding ways to work together. Illinois didn't get into the problems it has today by one party, Democrat or Republican. Both parties are responsible for where we are today. It's going to take effort of both parties to get us out of that. And as a community leader, as an elected official, I'm committed to trying to make that happen.
Thank you. Doug, your views on how, as a congressperson, you could affect and help the Illinois fiscal problems?
Well, the truth is Illinois' fiscal problems are very serious, and the solution starts in Springfield. But to the extent that anything we can do in the federal government to help Illinois, we should definitely take pains to do this. One of the things that's particularly important is that what we do, thank you, is that we make sure that even if our state is unable to match federal money on certain programs, that Illinois gets its share of federal revenues on transportation and other things to help rebuild our infrastructure and other items around the state. Because too often, we've left federal dollars untaken because of our dysfunction in Springfield, and we need to make sure that what we do is have caveats or things in there that we can collect that money. And what Julie Morrison said earlier is very true. The way we've passed laws in Washington have prevented Illinois from getting its fair share of federal revenues, and we have to take steps and be always aware when we look at bills that we have to take steps to counteract that and make sure that we are protected here in Illinois, and that would help as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the next question, we start with Doug. Has your campaign accepted any money from the NRA or its 501c4 arm, the Institute for Legislative Action, the ILA?
No. So this is probably a precursor to a series of questions, hopefully on gun control and gun violence. And I think that what Brad and I have, and I'll let Brad speak for himself, is that there are 2 different views of how we solve school violence. One view is we look at the tools of violence and we try and restrict that, and that's been Chicago's modus operandi for 20 years. And the other new idea that's coming out that Governor Rauner signed recently is we look at the people who we know are trouble, the people who we know have a problem, and we disarm them. And we go out and we have things like gun violence restraining orders, red flag laws that affect the people who are not able to manage their rights. So I am a civil libertarian. I believe in all the Bill of Rights, and I think what we need to do is do this with an eye toward due process, which is a warrant, probable cause, and a hearing. But we need to disarm the people who are trouble, and we need to change our understanding to what we have in airports, which is if you see something, say something. And I know that's very un-American. We kind of let everybody go. But we need to be more proactive, because almost all the cases we've seen in the last 20 years have been events where the people who've done them have been in trouble. Everybody knew it, everybody around them, and we need to take action to make sure that they get help. And we save them as well as all the people who died in the incident. Sorry.
No problem. Brad, does your campaign accepted any money from the NRA or its 501c4 arm, the ILA?
No, we haven't, and no, we won't. I won't accept money from the NRA. I doubt they would give me money. In fact, they've given me a grade of F on their scorecard. It is one of the few Fs I'm proud of. Daniel, I don't want you to get an F when you were in school, but if you got an F from the NRA, I'd be okay with that as well. This is an important issue, and I'm proud to say that this morning the Chicago Sun-Times came out with their endorsement of me in this election. And in their write-up, they endorsed, one of the reasons they said they endorsed me was because of my outspoken leadership on this specific issue, that I have been introducing legislation that is utterly sensible, was their term. We need to take steps to reduce the violence in our communities. We need to make sure that those people who shouldn't be buying guns can't get those guns by having universal background checks. We need to ban military-style assault weapons, ban these large capacity magazines that allow someone to come into a theater and fire off 70 bullets within a minute, ban bump stocks, all things that the NRA refuses to even give an inch on. So I'm proud of that, of my record on leading on this issue. I will continue to lead on this issue, and I promise I will continue to get enough.
Thank you. The next question is on defense spending, and we are going to start with Brad. It's a two-parter. Does the current budget devote sufficient resources to our defense? And then how would you improve services to our veterans? And would you include in that discussion a consideration of privatizing the VA?
Let me take those in reverse order. No, I don't think we should privatize the VA. I do think we need to make sure we are constantly investing in our veterans. They put their lives on the line day in and day out for our freedom, for our security. Julie and I are the parent of an officer in the Navy. He's on a destroyer as we speak now in the Pacific Ocean. We worry about him every day, but we are proud of the service he provides to our country. And every woman and man who puts on a uniform, protecting our nation and fighting for the values and principles that this nation stands for. And when they come home, they deserve to know that in the same way they had our back, we as a nation will have their back. We will provide them the care they need. Many are coming back from our wars we have in the Middle East with visible wounds, losses of limbs. But many are also coming back with wounds we can't see, emotional, post-traumatic stress. We need to make sure that we're investing in healthcare, that we're investing in mental health care. We have issues of military-related sexual abuse. We need to make sure that A, we do everything we can to end that, but B, that those who are victims of this abuse know that we will take care of them and make sure they get the service and the care they need throughout their lives. So I'm 100% committed to our veterans. With respect to national security, I voted for the national defense budget. I believe we need to make sure that our military has the resources. I believe the world looks to us to lead, but we cannot do it alone. We need to work with our allies.
Doug, on the defense budget and looking after veterans, including privatizing the VA.
All right, I would support the defense budget as well. I think that we need to look after and provide our troops in the field with the best possible equipment to make sure that as many of them come home safely as possible. Now, I don't have a child in service, but I am the son and grandson of people who fought overseas, so I understand. And I am appalled by some of the stories coming out of the VA of how our oversight has completely failed us, and in some places, the terrible conditions we've subjected these people to. And I think we need to look at all options, and I would not take anything off the table about how to provide the services that our veterans deserve and that we ought to demand for the people who put themselves in harm's way for us every day.
Thank you. Okay. Doug, the next question is on higher education. Do you think higher education is a right or a privilege? And what is your position on and solutions for the looming student debt problem?
Is it a right or a privilege? We all have this discussion. I think that we have a huge problem with runaway college tuition costs, and I've said that before. I think what we've done is we've put a lot of money in, and the colleges have stepped up and collected a lot of revenue. And I'm not sure that we've gotten our value from that. So what we've done is we've said that we've given children aid. We haven't given them aid, we gave them debt. And now we're finding out that debt isn't aid. That's a problem. What we need to do is we need to reduce the amount of debt that they can absorb and tell the colleges that they need to come up with things that can provide their education within the money that people can actually afford to pay. we've made it super easy for very young children who are 18, 19, and 20, and I know there are people who are like, I'm not a child, but you are, to say that you can take $50, $100, $200,000 worth of debt, it's no problem. It is a problem, and now we're finding it out. So we need to stop digging this, and we need to talk about how we're going to fund higher education, and we need to get the government out of the lending business, and we need to decide how we're going to bring a lot of these people out of their debt problem. So I think we're out of time here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
Brad?
Thank you. So I believe that every young person in this country who wants to pursue a higher education, a degree, a master's degree, who wants to go on to gain the skills and lessons they need to achieve their dreams and reach their potential should have the ability to do so. Having said that, I also believe that it shouldn't be the only path for people to achieve their success. Some people may choose to find their success through technical school. Some may choose to go right into the workforce after high school, and we need to make sure that all those paths are available. With respect to student loans, it is now the largest class of debt in this country. More student loan debt than credit card debt or home mortgages. And it is a burden and a cliff that we have to address before it becomes a crisis. For many people, it already is a crisis. Part of that is by lowering interest rates, making it more affordable for those people who do have debt. We need to provide the ability of those with debt to restructure their debt, or if they do face bankruptcy, to be able to get out of that debt through bankruptcy. I have voted for or supported legislation that would do that. But at the core, we have to make college education more affordable. We have to lower the cost of education. We have to create more pathways, whether it's through community college or advanced placement classes. The government runs the student loan program. We're making a profit on that program. We should be running that at break even so we lower the cost of debt. The principle, in my mind, is that someone who wants to get a four-year degree should be able to get that degree, work full-time, and graduate with no more debt than they can pay off reasonably within 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, we're going to start with you, Brett. It's on gun violence. What is your position on universal background checks, on closing gun show loopholes, increasing penalties for straw purchases of guns, and limiting high-capacity ammunition magazines?
Thank you. I think I've already addressed this. I support universal background checks. I think we should make trafficking across state lines a federal crime. I think we should close the gun show loophole. I think there are a number of common sense things we can do to address that. And so since I have a little bit more time, I'm going to use this time to go back and touch on something that we talked about in the past. Doug, I think, mischaracterized what he called a Democratic bill on immigration. It's not. It was a bipartisan bill that I helped craft and introduce with 25 Democratic, 25 Republican colleagues. It's called the USA Act. It would have provided the president the border security he wants on the border, but what it said was that mile by mile, the Department of Homeland Security had to say this is the technology they were using, maybe it's a barrier, maybe it's electronics, maybe it's human intelligence, and justify why that is the best method for that particular place along the border. This seems common sense to me. You can use walls where they make sense, use people where they make sense, and rely on technology where it makes sense. We had broad support in the House, Democrats and Republicans, for this bill. We had a plan to bring it to the floor with something called a discharge petition. 218 signatures would have forced a vote on the floor, but the Republicans, Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy, did everything they could to stop it. In the end, we came up 2 signatures short from getting a vote. I believe that bill would have passed. Maybe it wouldn't. But again, as I said earlier, the American people have a right for their representative to vote for that bill.
You have each now used some of your time for something off topic, so I guess you're even. Doug, your question on gun violence and restrictions on guns.
So let's start with universal background checks and something I didn't understand, because I found myself in possession of a firearm. I inherited a 1914 Colt revolver. It was my grandfather's service piece. I don't think it's been fired in anger in over 100 years. And as a historian, of course, I had to keep it. I was immediately told that I needed a FOID card. For those of you who don't know, it's like a driver's license for guns. So we went through the process, and I also found, interestingly enough, that every night, every person with a FOID card has a background check in the state of Illinois. Everybody, every day, even Sunday. I didn't know that. That was a surprise to me. So when people talk about universal background checks, I support them. I'm subject to them, it turns out, because I do have this historical piece. I've never bought a bullet, but I have a gun. But I'm not sure they're working in Chicago, and that's a real problem. And once again, I think that the idea that we can do this and not concentrate on the people is the wrong approach. Now, I support banning bump stocks. They're machine guns. They should have been banned. That was a mistake on the part of the administration, for sure. I don't know which administration. It was a mistake. So there are a lot of common sense things, and if you're illegally buying guns, that's a crime. We should prosecute it. That's fine, and I'm now out of time. But anyway, I'll let that go, and we'll go to our next question.
Okay, the next question is for you, Doug, and it is, do you support the current administration's policy on trade and tariffs?
I think that I was wrong. In 1994, I saw Ross Perot said that we're going to sign this NAFTA thing and all these jobs are going to go to Mexico and all these companies are going to build low-cost factories in places where they don't care about the environment. And I laughed. I was like, they'll never do that. Well, and I'm a hardcore free trader. I thought this was the greatest thing ever. And turned out that he was right and I was wrong. We were naive. So now when we have this time, we see a president who is willing to impose tariffs on people who bend the rules, who break the rules. In particular, we're talking about tariffs in China, because those are the only tariffs that are out there. And China is an exploitive government. It's a repressive at home and aggressive overseas. And I think that we need to have a strong policy to enforce international norms and effectively have a policy of containment as regard to China, similar to our policy of containment with regard to the Russian state in 1945, where we bring it in economically with solid trade agreements here in North America, in Asia, in Europe. So I do support the use of tariffs if necessary, even though as a free trader, I'd much rather have a tariff-free world because I think Americans compete better than anyone else in the world. And if we really do have fair trade, we will thrive and prosper, but we should not be taken advantage of. Thank you.
Brad, trade and tariffs, please.
Thank you. So we live in a global economy. That's a fact. We live in an economy where 95% of the world's population is outside the United States, 80% of the world's purchasing power. We need to be able to effectively and fairly compete in that global economy. I believe it's important for the United States to be engaged and lead in establishing the rules for that global economy and international trade, so that our workers and our companies have the chance to effectively compete, that we protect workers' rights in this country and around the world, that we protect our environment, we protect American intellectual property, and we make sure that those rules are fully enforceable. That's what I believe trade policy should look like. Unfortunately, what we see is trade policy by tweet, and it's not effective. I believe this president has used tariffs as a cudgel, as a club, has brought zero nuance to his trade policy. We need to punish the bad actors, and China has been a bad actor. But the tariffs that the president has put in place, as often as not, punished American companies and American workers. In August, when I had the chance to work in the district for the month, we had a tariff tour. We visited companies being affected by this. We visited a steel distributor. We visited manufacturers of scientific products, educational toys. We visited a variety of companies who all shared with us the impact these tariffs were having on their business. And in the month and a half since that tour, I've gotten calls, more than I can tell you, of companies saying, these policies are killing us. We need smart policy, not policy by tweet.
Thank you. Brad, yours is the next question, and it is on healthcare costs. What role do you believe the federal government should play in cost containment for healthcare?
So we have to address healthcare costs. We have to bend the cost curve. For the greatest part of my life, we saw healthcare inflation exceed the general rate of inflation in the country. I said earlier the Affordable Care Act was a step in the right direction, far from perfect, many flaws that need to be addressed. But what we saw after the passage of the Affordable Care Act is that the rate of inflation began to slow relative to the broader national rate of inflation. It did so by focusing on some of the challenges we face in our healthcare industry, in our healthcare segment. Too much of our healthcare is based on fee-for-service. We need to work and address outcomes, rewarding healthcare systems, healthcare professionals, healthcare providers for ensuring and providing the health of the American people. I suspect all of us, either personally or through connections, know people who are suffering from the rising cost of prescription medicines. We have to work to try to bring down the cost of drugs in this country so that everyone can afford to have the medicines that will provide them the daily living we all take for granted. We need to work to invest in innovation. I was one of the co-sponsors of a bill that eliminated, this was one of the flaws of the Affordable Care Act. There was a tax on medical devices, on the sale of medical devices. This was a tax on innovation. The only way we're going to bring down costs is coming up with new ideas, new technologies that provide better health care to Americans and the world at a lower cost. We have to continue to invest in innovation. Those are a few of the ideas I support to try to bring down this cost.
Doug, federal role in cost containment for healthcare.
The federal government does have roles in cost containment. There's a lot of policies driven out of Washington, and as I said earlier, for those people who remember healthcare in the aughts, we did have a pre-existing condition problem, but how many people pay more now for their insurance than they did then? Overall, we did bend the cost curve, and we bent it in an economically obvious way. The Obama administration decided to legislate against the law of supply and demand in an attempt to repeal it. We need ways that we work with the economic realities of the world, not against them. We need things that we can do that allow people to get the care they need at a reasonable price. And what we want to do is we want to look at lowering the per dose cost of prescription drugs, and that means sharing the cost of the drug over a wider audience, which may mean changing the way we handle the patent laws so that there's more people paying for the development costs than we have now. We need new ideas on how we're going to do this, and it seems to me that when people take credit for defending the expense of the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act and then take away the funding for it, like the medical device tax, which I agree with, what they leave is an unsustainable system that is poised on the verge of collapse. We have a short window of time where we can start putting down something new and leave something old in place to find new answers that work for people and let people choose themselves what our healthcare system looks like going forward. Sorry.
Thank you. This will be the last question before closing statements. So I'm sorry we are out of time. I have stacks more questions. But this one is for you, Doug. The atmosphere in Washington is toxic and has been for many years. What would you do to change that? And do you have any ideas on how to bring back civil discourse in our society?
It is toxic, and this is probably a lot easier than trying to describe health insurance in 90 seconds. When I'm in a business and we're trying to solve a problem, what we do is we find key stakeholders and we bring them to the table. We see what they need, and we make sure people get some part of what they want and not all of what they want. And we've lost that. It seems to me that everybody in Washington is trying to win today's news cycle and not work toward an understanding. In the old days, the majority party would have its number one priority, its number two priority, and would concede the minority party's number one priority. And we'd just go down the list, so everybody would go home saying, I got stuff done. Somewhere, they've decided that it's better not to get stuff done than to solve our problems. And I think we need people who are not dug in, who are not bitter and angry, or not part of this system and the merry-go-round and the lobbyists and the PACs and all that money that goes through there that drive people into their own little corners that at the end of the day, they cannot bring themselves to be the person who stands with the other side on a given issue, and they can't bring themselves to let each side take a turn on trying to get their things done. And I think that understanding that comes from a different place than Washington is what we need to bring back to Washington, a civility and an understanding that everybody has an agenda and that everybody's agenda can be served at least in part, and no one should be left behind and no one left no one forgotten.
Thank you. Brad, minute and a half on the toxicity in, I didn't say that right, in Washington and civil discourse.
Thank you. I understand what you were saying, and I think this is one of the biggest challenges we face in the country. We have lost the ability to talk to each other with respect. We have to get back to that. I mentioned earlier we've had 28 in-person town halls this term around the district and in all the communities that make up the district. In those meetings, we have people who are Trump supporters, we have people who are Bernie supporters, and everybody in between. But we have always had a sense of respect in those meetings because that's the way I believe we should always conduct ourselves, and it's what I try to do. But I also believe we're only going to tackle our problems, whether it's healthcare, the environment, gun violence, education, all the issues we've talked about today, if we come together and solve those problems across party lines. The only sustainable solutions we see in this country have been achieved through bipartisan effort. That's why last year I was part of a group that formed something called the Problem Solvers Caucus. 24 Democrats, 24 Republicans who committed to each other to work together. And we've put out position papers that have led to proposals for legislation and working towards laws on health care, on immigration, on infrastructure. And we are continuing to work those ideas, and we will continue to work them in the next Congress. I have a group, not very creatively named, the Bipartisan Working Group. We get together once a week in Washington for coffee and muffins, and it's usually bad coffee and bad muffins. But the purpose is we sit down and we talk to each other. We share with each other ideas, and we try to build support. And that's how we get things going moving forward. As I said before, I hope the Democrats take back the House. I'm doing everything I can to work to that, but when we do take back the House, we have to commit to work with the other side to get things done.
Thank you. With that, we come to the end of the questions. And as I said at the beginning, the closing statements will be done in reverse order from the opening statements. So Doug, you get to do the closing statement.
Thank you. I do appreciate the League of Women Voters holding this forum for us, and everyone here who came to show up to listen to Brad and I. Hopefully this has been more civil than some of the other things. For both of us. No. Now, why? This is a question of why me, right? This is what it is, and when Brad's going to say why Brad. I've spent my life solving problems for people. I go to companies that are in trouble and I fix things that are broken. That's what I do. And I'm judged based on results. I go there, if I don't succeed, I'm done. A lot of times people tell you about holding meetings. That's like having status reports. Nobody in my industry gets graded on their status reports. Anybody ever get a raise for being every status report on time? Probably not. And you hear, I proposed, I voted for, I supported. What you really want to hear and listen for is, I enacted. I made this happen. You can say you're bipartisan, but until you get people from the other side to actually vote for your bill, you're not bipartisan yet, because you don't know what their side wants enough to get them to buy in. You don't know how to create the bipartisan final legislation that makes things happen. And the difference is, I look at results, and if you weed away all the words about support and vote and meetings, I think you'll have two people who have very different understandings of what success and achievement look like.
Thank you. Brad, your closing statement.
Thank you, and I again want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum, for Deerfield High School for so graciously welcoming us into the school, and for all of you for joining us today. As I've said before, this job is the highest responsibility, the greatest honor I've ever had. I take it very seriously. I run as a Democrat, but I represent everyone in the district. Those who vote for me, those who don't vote for me, and even those who don't vote for all. My responsibility is to go to Washington as the representative of the 10th Congressional District and fight for the values and priorities of our community. We are working to try to solve our problems, and we will only solve those problems if we find ways to bridge the gap and cross the aisle and work together. But each and every day that the House of Representatives is in session, I take votes on behalf of you, the people of this district. And you can count on me each and every day to be focused on the priorities of this district. I will always vote to protect a woman's right to choose and to keep funding for programs like Planned Parenthood and health care for every American. I will always fight to protect our environment and make sure we deliver to the next generation and those living today quality, clean water, safe air, and an environment that is worthy of our nation and our legacy. The votes I take day in and day out reflect the work I do trying to understand who I'm representing and what's important to our community. That's why we've done these 28 town halls, and I will continue to do that. I thank you for your time today, and I hope I can count on your support.
Thank you to both our candidates, obviously, for running. You have no democracy without candidates. Thank you all for being here. This is critical. Thank you to all the league organizers and volunteers. There are many, many of them who have worked hard to make this happen. Most importantly, make sure you vote. Make sure everybody you know who's eligible to vote votes. And make sure you volunteer for campaigns. You participate in our democracy. Be a poll watcher. Be an election judge. Get out there and make it happen.